What's up everybody, it's Rob from the Basement Bike Shop, and in this video I'm going to show you how I upgrade a bike from a one-piece crank to a three-piece crank. Now this is definitely the first thing I would upgrade on my bike if I owned a bike with a one-piece crank, even though it is the most expensive. But it's definitely going to give you the most improved performance in your BMX bike. So let's jump right in. One of the things you're going to need is a three-piece crank, and that'll come with the arms, the spindle, the crank bolts, and then a sprocket bolt in one of the arms, at least one of the arms. If you're installing a two-piece crank, it'll look pretty much the same, except your right arm will already be attached to your spindle, like that. You also need the sprocket adapter, depending on what size spindle you have. This is a 19mm. And then I need an American bottom bracket conversion kit for a 19mm spindle. So when you buy your conversion kit, the American refers to the size of the housing on the frame, and then the 19mm refers to the inside diameter. So the conversion kit will come with the cup adapters, the bearings. These are actually mid bearings, so it converts it right to mid. The dust covers / spacers, and then a bunch of other spacers and your center spacer. And then you're also going to need different pedals, because a one-piece crank has half-inch pedals and a three-piece has 9/16. So we're going to bring out the VFR for this. It's the only bike I have with a one-piece. And the first thing I'm going to do is take the chain off. So I'm going to loosen the back tire just to get the chain off the sprocket. Alright, I'm going to drop the bike to the ground because most people don't have a bike stand, so we're going to do it like this. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the pedals. Remember that the left pedal is left-handed threads, so it's lefty-tighty, righty-loosey, and then the right pedal is normal threads, so righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. This also applies to all the hardware on the left side of the crank. It is also left-handed threads. So to take the jam nut off, you'll turn it right or clockwise instead of the normal counterclockwise. And then the lock washer. And then remove the cone nut. And a lot of times this isn't that tight that I can spin it off by hand as long as the threads are clean. And then my trick to getting the crank out easily is to pull the bearings out. I pull the left one completely off, and then the right one I just pull out of the cup, and the crank should slide right out. Then I'll just take a hammer and a punch, and I'll tap the cup. Make sure I kind of do it evenly. A little bit at the bottom, a little bit at the top, and the cup should pop right out. Lastly, we have to remove the sprocket from the crank. Now for this we'll need a special spanner wrench. There are a couple different ones to use. I have this kind of adjustable one. I found the best way to do this is to put it on the edge of my workbench. Be careful, by the way, this is a good way to take the skin off your knuckles. And then I use one hand just to hold it in place, and I tap the other one with a hammer. Keeps my knuckles out of harm's way. And we're ready for the install. Now on to the installation. I'll try to show you as many different ways to install it as possible. I'm going to do it with a bench vise, which means I'm going to take my tires and chain off so the bike's a little lighter to hold up straight in the bench vise. Now the proper way to put cups and bearings in is with a cup press, and I'll try and show you as many different ways to do it besides that as I can. Now if you're going to upgrade to a 48 spline crank, I'll have a link at the end or in the description that'll show you how to install a 48 spline crank. You're still going to want to install the bottom bracket the same way though. If you're upgrading an unsealed 3-piece to a sealed 3-piece, I have a video on the installation and removal of an unsealed 3-piece that you can watch to help you remove it. And if you're upgrading from a 1-piece to an unsealed 3-piece, don't. Just don't. I feel like for the amount of money you're spending, you're not even getting half of the upgrade that you would by putting a sealed 3-piece on. It's better to just spend a little bit more money and get the sealed 3-piece. Trust me, it's worth it. Next, we're going to prep the jaws of the bench vise. If you've seen my bottom bracket installation video, I do it in that one too. It's actually one of my first videos I ever released. This is kind of a new way of doing it for me. I used to always do the block of wood and hammer trick with the knee pads on, and then the rod brace. But then when I got a bench vise, I thought, man, this is way nicer. I can do it with minimal effort. To start the installation, the first thing I'm going to do is press the bearings into the cups. I put a little bit of grease on the inside of the cups, or the outside of the bearing. Get it centered in my jaws, and then just press it together, making sure that the bearing is going in evenly. If it starts to go crooked, you can always stop and adjust. Then I'll take the dust cover along with a spacer to make it even on the inside. And then I'll put it backwards so it's flat against my bearing, and I'll countersink it just a little bit into my cup. And then I'll do that to both cups and bearings. Then it's time to press them into the frame. We'll do one at a time, making sure that no part of the frame is going to get compromised, so the jaws don't hit the back forks or any of the other tubes. And then we watch how straight it goes in. I'm adjusting to get the bearing to go in straight, so I'm just pushing at the wide part. And I'll keep adjusting like that until I can get it all the way in nice and straight. And we'll do the same thing to the other side too. Now I know my angle isn't that great. It's hard to see, but if we go back to my first bench vise video, you can see as this bearing starts going in a little bit crooked, and loosen the frame and adjust it up. And then I finish pressing it all the way in. Now, one important thing to remember is not to forget to put in the center spacer before you put the bearings in. But if you're like me and you forgot, Then I'll show you how to fix that. Bring our punch back and our hammer. And we're just going to hit that inside chrome ring on the bearing. Nice and gently tap it till it pops out of the cup. And then we'll put our center spacer in. And then put it all back together. Now if you don't have a bench vise, then we can set the bearings in the cups with a block of wood and a hammer. We'll line the bearing up inside the cup. And then I take a look at the bearing every so often to make sure it's going in straight. That way I can give it a little more of a smack on the side that needs to go in more. And we'll use the dust cover and spacer to countersink it in the same way. After we get the bearings seated in the cups, there's a couple of different ways we can put them in the frame without a bench vise or a cup press. I guess the oldest method is with the hammer and block of wood. Put a little grease in the frame, and then I put knee pads on just to brace the frame. I don't want to brace it solid, at least not on the triangle and the down tube. If I'm going to brace the frame solid, I want to do it against the other side of the bottom bracket. And then I use a block of wood. And just like when you're putting the bearing in the cup, you want to look at it every so often to make sure that it's going in straight. The other method I like to use is bracing solid against the other side of the bottom bracket. For that, I use a Rob brace, patent pending. A Rob brace is a 2x4 that I stack up on whatever I have to get it to the exact same height as the bottom bracket, and then I put it against a concrete or a block wall. And that'll allow me to use a 2x4 and a hammer to hit the other side without having to put my knee pads on, and kind of to get a more solid hit without bending the frame. If you'd like to learn more about either of these techniques, I have a bottom bracket installation video that I'll put a link to in the description, and that'll go through all three techniques, just focusing on the bottom bracket. Alright, now that the bottom bracket's installed, we want to put the spindle in and measure the distance away from the frame that we want the sprocket and the arm. Now usually we're trying to get the sprocket as close to the frame without the sprocket or the arm hitting, just to avoid too much chain jog. The way I did it for this BSD Substance XL 2-piece crank is I got it where I wanted it, and then I seen how many spacers I would need to take up the gap. Then I make sure that the distance covered by the sprocket, spacers, and dust cover matches the distance covered on the other side by the dust cover and spacers. And then I put them on. Next we'll put on the crank arms. I'll start with the right arm. We'll take out the chainring bolt or sprocket bolt. Now if you want to put a little bit of grease or anti-seize, or I like to use motorcycle chain lube on the spindle, you can do that. The motorcycle chain lube keeps the creaking and cracking down, noises that it makes sometimes. If you take your chainring bolt in and out a lot, then I would put like a little bit of Loctite on it, medium or light strength, and I do the same thing to my crank bolts. After we get both crank arms on, we're going to put in the crank bolts that go into the spindle, and we're going to tighten them down before we tighten down the pinch bolts. Once you get the crank bolts tightened all the way down, then we can tighten the pinch bolts. Now remember, if you've been taking these in and out a lot, put a little bit of Loctite on them, like a medium strength or a light strength, just to make sure they hold. Then after you get these tightened down, make sure that your sprocket bolt is tight. And lastly is the pedals. Now these are the old pedals, and they're 1/2 inch. You can see that they don't fit in this crank. 3-piece cranks take 9/16 pedals. We'll put a little grease on the threads and we'll install them. Remember that the left pedal is left-handed threads, so it'll go counterclockwise to tighten, and the right pedal will go clockwise to tighten. And our crank is installed. All we have to do is put the wheels and the chain back on and we're good to go. And remember, if you want to know more about 1-piece crank removal, bottom bracket installation, or 3-piece crank installation, 48 spline or 8 spline, I'll put links to the videos in the description. Thanks for watching.